we need to be a different kind of man. We need to be more sensitive. We need to tap into our feminine side, and and then there's this idea that this is in kind of softening, if you will, has now emasculated us, and therefore we need to make this radical shift the other way. Where for me, the understanding was always, it's not replacing one thing with another, it's broadening your horizons. So one of the taglines for Noted Man was towards an expanded masculinity, right? It's a masculinity that you're still a protector, you're still a provider, but you have all of these other things as part of your character.
Yeah.
It's not either or, right? So, you are confident enough on one day to wear a pink shirt or the other day I was wearing a full pink suit. But largely, I'm a monochrome guy. To taking a bit of a step back and say, actually, have we been doing too much celebrating and not enough introspection, right?
Welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'm your host, Kojo Baffoe. In this podcast, I speak to Africans from across a multitude of sectors, including business, art, culture, media, design, technology, advertising, and everything in between, delving into their journeys and reflecting on the lessons they have learned along the way. It's about gaining insight into why and how they do what they do. These conversations offer a treasure trove of takeaways on a wide range of topics, including craft, relationships, wellness, parenting, entrepreneurship, and much more. So my guest today is Siphiwe Mpye, who has built a career in the media over the last 20 plus years, which reveals both our ages, I think. Most recently, he was editor of Wanted magazine and has recently become strategic revenue and growth manager for Wanted. Very fancy title.
Very fancy sounding.
Yeah. My first question, and I tend to jump all over the place, but some years back, you moved your family to East London and you commute to Joburg after having spent time in Joburg.
Yeah.
What prompted that?
Number of things. Thank you for having me, by the way. It's been a long time coming. but I think I'm happy that it's happened now because we're in these Swiss studios. I think in the beginning I was going to be a guinea pig. I was going to be a guinea pig in the lo-fi version. So I'm happy to be here. So it was January or February 2020, just prior to lockdown or even COVID. I mean, there were whispers of COVID, but it was something that was far removed from us at the time.
Yeah.
A month later, we all know what happened. But we, my wife and I had been entrepreneurs at the time, and we had both worked in the media for a very long time, and then we went into entrepreneurship. And there was a sense that we could work from anywhere with what we were doing. And if we needed to travel, we would travel. But there was also a sense of, many years ago, I interviewed Ray Phiri, and I asked him why he didn't live in Johannesburg. A lot of the time he was working in Johannesburg. And, he gave me this, he drew this picture for me where every time he would drive into Joburg, he was living in Mpumalanga, beautiful place in Mpumalanga. I was privileged enough to spend some time with him. And, he would feel, as he was kind of getting into Gauteng, he would feel a kind of heaviness settling on his shoulders. And he didn't want that every day. So, he lived where he lived in Mpumalanga, in the mountains, basically, with greenery around him, and that gave him peace. And he would go into Joburg when he needed to, and then go out. And so Joburg had become that for us, especially for my wife. And it kind of made sense at the time with what was going on in our lives to just do that. And of course, a month later, COVID happened, and we had plans for stuff in Joburg and stuff in the Eastern Cape. So we had this plan of kind of commuting, taking turns, and doing all of that. But then that didn't happen because lockdown happened, and then we were stuck. It kind of felt like we were stuck in the Eastern Cape. So whenever there was a gap to come up to Joburg to do things, we did that. But yeah, we spent We've recently moved back. We spent the last almost 5 years in East London, or just outside East London.
You recently moved back to Joburg?
Yes, we
The
did.
whole family?
The whole family, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So no more commuting. And yeah, it was the right time, because I think with my work as well, there was a rhythm to making magazines, but the rhythm gets a bit disturbed when there are events to attend, and you have to show your face, and you can't keep telling people, no, I'm not in town, I'm not in town. And then there would be overseas trips, as you well know, so it takes a toll. And yeah, we're back, settling in, trying to find a house, all sorts of things.
Because I was saying
Airbnb.
earlier that that's the part of it I do not miss at all. The kind of being out and like the politician's version of kissing babies and waving at people.
Yeah.
It's like showing face at different things. How is that rhythm in terms of, so first, actually, before I get to that, a lot of us think about it, right? A lot of us think about actually the way our lives are structured. You don't have to be in a particular place. You can make decisions about where you live that are separate from where you work. So we think about it, but there's actually doing it. What would you say was the thing that kind of pushed you to actually do it, to go beyond just, okay, we're entrepreneurs, we can work from anywhere,
Sure.
especially with kids.
Yeah, I think, also, to be honest, there was also the work thing where, you actually don't have enough, when you actually don't have enough work in a particular place to justify you being there full time. So you then kind of weigh those options and say, look, maybe, it's time for a new scene, kind of pack up, go slow down a bit. I mean, we ended up in a place called Sunrise on Sea, which is, the house we found was kind of on a little hill, and you would literally just walk down the hill onto the beach, which was great for us, great for the kids. They went to a little farm school, and they thrived there. And so we kind of found a different part of ourselves there as well. And for me, the commuting, when it was good, I stayed in Joburg because I was still, my wife was over Joburg, like completely. And I wasn't quite done with it, so I needed that. And she's a village girl. So she's kind of at home in the Eastern Cape. And that's where I grew up as well. But, I'm an urban boy, I'm a township boy. So I needed my urban fix. But every time I went back home, I would say to a lot of people that it felt like I was leaving right at the right time, going back and settling and kind of taking a breather and going to the beach and just settling down. And then I would leave, but I would also leave that part of my life at just the right time, to go and get my urban fix. So yeah, the balance most of the time was good. But in coming back to Joburg now, it's really about, and with my job change and everything, it's a new energy. It's me going out there now with a different hat on. It's me looking at Joburg in a different way, and being excited about certain things, being a bit lost around certain other things that are new to me. Because this place is dynamic; it changes all the time. So it's a new energy, and I'm happy to be back.
You've been editing. You've edited for. It's been a consistent kind of feature. It feels like in your life for quite a while, and this feels like a step in a slightly different direction. Is it?
Yeah, it is to a large extent. It is. My first editing job was at YMAG. With Tami Masumula and Reina Julies. Well, when I was hired, we were hired as a trio, like a editing trio, which of course didn't last very long because, as you well know, you can only have one editor on the title.
Yeah.
So then that trio was broken up. We all stayed in the magazine, but our roles were broken up a bit. So that was, I was 24, 25 when that happened. It was ridiculously young to be an editor. I'm grateful for the opportunity, but for many years, I was kind of just floating through the thing and trying to figure it out. And YMAG was that kind of an environment. It was within the YFM environment as well.
Because why was that in itself?
Exactly.
Like it was,
we were just.
this is a new kind of, it's a new world, it's a new space. Let's all just figure it out as we go.
Yeah, we were winging it. We were growing up in public. We were making mistakes, loud mistakes, quiet mistakes, but moving along. Figuring it out. And Jefferson Hack, founder of the Days Group, says kind of this like figuring it out as you go along. And yeah, it's almost 25 years later now. And throughout those years, intermittently, I've done editing work. I think probably the majority of the work I've done is editing work over those 25 years, although I've done other things, as you well know. So right now, stepping away from being an editor is, I'm still, I think in my work, it's a very commercial environment. I'm basically in sales. I'm selling everything that's not full page, full color advertising. But I'm selling interesting things, alternative things that we didn't think were possible 20 years ago. We're looking at eventing, we're looking at what to do with digital, we're looking at what kind of partnerships to create, looking at the possibility of brand extensions for Wanted. So many things that are quite exciting, that in many ways are new, especially in the luxury lifestyle environment. Something as simple as a podcast, for example, we started last year while I was still editor, and still none of our competitors are doing podcasts so many years later. And you'll know that I started podcasting, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, and in my personal capacity. But we started doing that. We are in an environment at Arena Holdings where there's so many parts of the business that I'm looking at and finding connections with. Recently started doing some experiments on Business Day Television where we're hosting a Wanted show and doing interviews and hosting different people. So it's still, there's still a content piece to the work. The only difference now is that I'm the one responsible for monetizing all of those content pieces. Aspasia Karas has taken over as editor, and it feels kind of like a full circle moment because she was my boss previously. She was our publisher previously. She hired me 4 years ago to edit Wanted, and now we're almost switching roles in a way. There's a lot of continuity in amongst all of that change, and it's quite exciting.
Well, it's interesting that you are now doing the thing, or you're now responsible for the thing that for many kind of journalists and hardcore media people was always frowned upon.
Yeah,
which is
the dark side.
Yeah, which is taking stories and figuring out how you're going to make money out of stories.
Yeah, I think journalism has changed a lot over the years, but I think editing, especially in the lifestyle environment, has also changed a lot. And editors have had to think differently. You wake up and you look at you watch the news, you read the papers, you look at what's happening in your feed, and then you process that from a content perspective. And then there's an added layer that didn't even creep in. It kind of just like rolled in very rapidly over the last few years, where you had to then think, how do we monetize this? And monetization for me, when you think about it from an editor's perspective, is really about survival. It's really about how you leverage the information that you're gathering and disseminating in a way that makes your job sustainable, that makes your platform sustainable. And I think that's the way to think about it. What has led me here in this new job or in this new role that I'm playing is not feeling like I could sell my ideas better. I think because I spend a lot of time as an entrepreneur, as a media entrepreneur. So when I was doing Noted Man, for example, I was editor-in-chief, I was podcaster-in-chief, I was salesperson-in-chief, and I did that for a number of years, and successfully in many ways, but there was just not enough of that work that was out there as an individual, as just a one-man band. So I kind of felt like I had experience in doing that kind of thing. I could think in that way. I knew where the silos were, and I knew how to tap into kind of, okay, this is editorial and it needs to maintain its integrity and so on. But we can look at the commercial side and sell this. This is what we can sell. So as an entrepreneur, for example, with Noted Man, I would leverage what we were doing on the website with eventing, speaking to brands. We would pop up at different places, would collaborate with brands. One of the proudest moments was being able to collaborate with the handmade fair. What is it called again? Handmade Contemporary. Because I kind of spoke to Mandla Sibeko, who was part of the organization then before he went independent, and said, look, my platform, my history. This is the audience I want to bring to Handmade Contemporary Fair. I'll bring in a sponsor. And he said, let's try it. They never done anything like that before. So we set up a lounge with Biski. There was a little grooming section there. I mean, Taryn was on your podcast recently. We spoke to Taryn. She did the grooming section. So we had a barber's chair. She got a barber in. Her products were there. So it was kind of worked with Anikesh from The Modernist. He brought in the furniture. And, it was a thing. It became a pop-up. There were like 17 to 20,000 people that went in and out there. A whole lot of famous and not so famous people coming in, sitting in our chair, having a chat about, and what then happened was that our platform then shot through the roof after that, so it was kind of knowing that I can't put those dots together in a sustainable way, and this is what I'm hoping to do with my new position.
How do you end up in journalism or in media?
So I'd always been a writer as a kid. I'd write crazy little stupid stories. I used to write some bad poetry. And I remember when it was time to go to university. So I was also, most of my high school career, I went to two high schools. So in my last 2 years of high school, I went to Queen's College. This was the first time I went to a boarding school, boys only boarding school. I'd been kind of in very liberal Catholic school environments, co-ed, playing football, dreaming of playing for Liverpool. And then in my last 2 years, there was like a shift, going to a Model C school for the first time and kind of encountering, in many ways, what was a total culture shift. From having teachers who were in the black sash, kind of white liberal environment, to having basically kind of hardcore Afrikaner teachers who would say the most outrageous thing in class. And, but also being in an environment where I met so many boys that are still my friends today and I consider brothers, and we were in many ways part of like this Model C experiment, and we had to kind of band together. I had to learn to play rugby in record time. But the one thing that made me popular was because I could write. So people would come with their little compositions and creative writing projects, like, okay, help me here, help me there. I remember actually when I left in matric, I actually sold my composition book, and it was like gold to whoever got it, and yeah, so I was always a writer. I was also, I participate in drama. It's a bit of an all-rounder actually, because academically I was good, although I didn't put in as much effort as I should have. I could have got straight A's, but I didn't. It's kind of like
every report card I had through high school.
Yeah,
you would do better if you put in more work.
For sure. So there was so academically I was strong, culturally I was strong, and I was good at sports as well. I did athletics, so I got triple colors, across those three areas: academics, culture, and sports. but the feeling was always amongst everyone, in my family, my friends, my peer group, that I would be some kind of a writer, a journalist, or write scripts or whatever the case may be. And I think I rebelled against that. It's like, you don't know me. Why I'm gonna. So whenever I would then be asked what I would do. I would do after school. Everything from being a marine biologist. I mean, I wasn't great at science. I was okay, but I don't know where that came from. At some point, I wanted to be an entertainment journalist, and then at some point there was also the thought of not entertainment journalist or entertainment lawyer. And I thought about psychology as well. So my first year transcript then was representative of that, because it was like all sorts of crazy subjects within the social sciences that didn't quite make sense. And only in my second year university, I kind of went back home, as it were, and kind of packed my bags from UCT and like off I went to Grahamstown to study journalism. And I think that's where I found myself in that environment. It was quite, because I'd grown up as a shy kid, and so big environments like Cape Town and UCT were quite a culture shock for me.
You grew up where? East London?
In Gqeberha.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was born in Durban, and then I think when I was about 6 years old, we moved to Gqeberha, which was PE then, Dubai. And that's where I grew up.
And then Cape Town.
Yeah. Cape Town, and then what was then Grahamstown, and then Joburg.
I think Grahamstown, I mean, was it interesting? I mean, I didn't know what Grahamstown is like now. So I say it was an interesting time because kind of there's a particular period where, I mean, I also had friends. Like I had a lot of friends. My younger siblings went to high school in Grahamstown.
Right.
But I mean, the journalism kind of course there is, I'd say, one of the most respected in the country.
Well, I think it's still the top journalism school in the country, although Wits, which also became my alma mater later on, came on in leaps and bounds. So I think I don't know where the rating is now, but yeah, Rhodes is still.
What was it like moving to kind of Grahamstown? Because it is, I mean, it's smaller than Gqeberha.
No, it is.
So you go from Gqeberha to the big city, and then you come to this literally basically a school town.
Yeah.
With people from around the country and also around the continent, all in this fishbowl.
Yeah, it was great for me. When I think about the things that were pivotal in the person that I've become, going to Grahamstown, going to Rhodes was one of the most important things that happened to me. Because what it did was, although it was a small environment, you're right, there were so many people from all over the continent, the world. I made so many good friendships with people from Zimbabwe, people from Nigeria, and then all around, Joburg, Cape, all over the country. So, and I tapped into things. It stretched me in a way that a small town can, because you're not competing with a whole bunch of people. You're in a small pond. You can actually become a big fish in that small pond, and that actually worked for someone who had grown up as a shy kid. Was always in the background, highly talented, but quite retiring, and never wanted the spotlight on them. And and I got in with a bunch of rascals who who became my brothers as well, who saw in me what I failed, or what I had failed to see in me until then, and got me to try all sorts of things. So from DJing, I always loved music. There was a sense that when we got there, what I got there at least, there was a sense that, the white kids on campus were very well catered to. There were always parties at the union and different places on campus and off campus. But, the black kids would go to the same party and wait for that hour where they would play our music. And then, so we decided, why do we have to do that? Let's do our own gigs. So we started doing our own gigs, and campus was ready for it, and what when I think about the kind of kind of xenophobic climate that we continually find ourselves in our country. You know, I think back to the parties that we used to throw. They were like, you know, it was Pan-African. We had friends, especially from Zim, who you know, would DJ with us, who would kind of pull together in a set. There would be a Kwaito set. I played a lot of Kwaito, almost exclusively. And then we had a friend AG who would play, you know, the Zim R&B, well, not the Zim R&B, but the R&B that the Zimbos liked. And they got to like pretend they were in Harare for a moment there. I think their big club then was Circus. Yeah, so they would pretend that they were at Circus for that hour. And yeah, so we would, you know, do all of these clubs around. I mean, there weren't many clubs, and I say clubs, probably like more like bars that we turned into clubs. You know, and I got onto the radio station RMR, and you know, various societies. I mean, it was weird because at some point I became the president of the ballroom dancing society. And I could hardly dance. It was just like one of those things where, yeah, you just try things, you know. And on a whim, a friend of mine, it was a dare actually. He dared me to interview to be a sub warden at Goldfields residence, and I kind of took the dare. I didn't make it, and then I went off on holiday, and then I got a letter saying, "Oh, the guy who was chosen, one of the guys that was chosen, is not coming back. He decided not to."
You are now sub-warden.
I was now sub-warden. And, you know, so I tell my parents, and I show them the letter. The first thing my dad says, like, it says here you're going to get a salary. It means no more pocket money for you. So it opened me up, you know, it made me brave. It made me, I think it influenced some of the decisions I would then make in my career, because, you know, for example, I was working under the tutelage of Sandile Memela at Sunday World. There was a section called Ola, which kind of was between him, myself, and Vuyom Duyedwa, and a number of contributors like Bongani Madondo and so on. These are like journalists that ended up being my friends, but they were mentors to me. Where that section, that art section became like a really big deal after. But I would have never had the bravery to. I mean, I used to write upwards of 7 like stories a week, right, on a print title, where it wasn't opinion piece, so it wasn't me just writing columns. No, it was going out there, interviewing people, writing about music, especially Kwaito, writing about dance, stretching myself to write about film, fumbling, you know, along the way, and learning about so many things. I remember Madondo coming to see who this little Siphiwe Mpye was. He was seeing this byline and seeing this kind of fresh take on music. And of course, he was kind of like, he was a big idol of mine. You know, I used to read his stuff in the Mail and Guardian.
He is a character, and he's very forthright and blunt and strong-willed
this
and
is
opinionated.
So he comes, and I was sitting opposite. I used to sit opposite Charles Molele then, and I'm busy writing. So he comes around to Charles, and he's like, "Charles, where is this Siphiwe Mpye?" And then Charles is like, "There it is." It's like, young man, come here. Okay, so I go, and then he takes out his bag, and then like he pulls out a whole lot of magazines, a whole lot of Vibe magazines and XXL magazines and Rolling Stones, and like okay, you're a very good writer, you've got lots of potential, but you need to read. And he like gives me these magazines. I want them back in a week. And I was kind of like, oh gosh, he's so arrogant, you know, like, and I kind of thought about this thing of, never meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you, you know. But I'm forever grateful that he did that. So, you know, many years later, we're friends and commissioned him to write for me. And, you know, it's I suppose it's a story then full of those opportunities, or taking those opportunities. And I think my time at Rhodes gave me the bravery to be able to jump at things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting enough. I would say I learned how to write, particularly around kind of music, culture, and that stuff, because I used to collect all the hip hop magazines and music magazines, like from high school when there was like Right On magazine, and what's the Beat magazine, to I had a full collection of rap pages, Double XL, Source, Vibe, and I wrote, and I wrote for myself. And my father always encouraged me to write, but it was reading, in inverted commas, those early hip hop journalists, and then the guys that used to write for Village Voice, like Mark Anthony Neal, Greg Tate, Nelson George, and then later Dream Hampton. It was their writing that made me want to write about music.
Yeah.
And really influenced the way that I wrote, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. Dream Hampton was my holy grail. And for me, for a very long time, I thought she was a man. I didn't know Dream was a woman until, until maybe about a few weeks before she came down to South Africa. Actually, I think it was Black August.
It was Black August.
Yeah. And I realized and I remember saying to my dondo, like, I didn't realize Dream was a man. I mean, was a woman. And he killed himself.
No, so I always knew. I remember when she came for Black August, and it was what was weird for me is that I got to build some type of relationship with her because of Twitter.
All right.
And like, I mean, every now and then, like, I'll still on Instagram or Twitter, well, more Instagram now because I'm not really on Elon Musk's Twitter. But, like I'll interact with her every now and then. And last time she was here, we had coffee together. And it was one of those surreal moments where just kind of internally on my own, I'm just like, I'm sitting across from Dream Hampton. Like, I followed this person's writing when I was, 17, 18, 19. And then you fast forward whatever years and we're sitting there having a conversation as kind of peers. Like, why did that happen?
Yeah. I still have a picture in her backstage at Black August, my chubby cheeks. I'm kind of like smothering her in this big hug. Yeah, but I can relate to that. I mean, I met Greg Tate before he passed when he was down here for a seminar, and yeah, it was also it was quite surreal, and meeting your idols. I mean, when I started in journalism, I started at the Sowetan, and I think I've written about it. I think my first editor's letter for Wanted, I told this story where I was so privileged to come into an environment where I was nurtured and mentored by Don Matera, who was associate editor then. And Agri-Cluster was the editor-in-chief, and he took a particular liking to me. And my immediate editor, well, not my immediate editor, because I mean, this was a time when newspapers had budgets.
Yeah.
So you had an assignments editor, you had a commissioning editor, and then you had like a day editor, night editor, managing editor, and then you had the editor of the magazine, and then there was editor-in-chief. So the editor of the magazine was Mike Soluma. Of the newspaper was Mike Soluma, who is now a colleague of mine at the Sunday Times. And while he's still Bramike, our interaction is so different. Interaction is as colleagues, and Agri-Cluster was, he as you'll know, he did the nation building project, which was kind of his legacy really. And especially in the Kataras area where there'd been so much violence leading up to democracy. And he chose me as like this little cadet journalist to go around with him while he was doing his work and document all of this. Do the interviews with ex-SDU members, people who had been part of Amabuto in the hostels, attacking the community and then retaliation and so on. So both sides of the conflict, and those stories, documenting those stories, listening, almost like sitting at the feet of Aglaste as he kind of did his part in this reconciliation, like shaped me in an enormous way, and affected even till this day the way that I look at culture, the way that I look at even things like luxury. Working for a luxury title now, the lens that I apply to things affected was affected by all of those interactions. Don Matera, he told me, like, he wrote in his own hand that, Siphiwe, you have a special mystique. And I kept that piece of paper for many years. I lost it, can't remember where it went, but it's the kind of thing that drove me for so many years, and it's the kind of thing that helps me whenever, whenever things feel like they're heavy and difficult, and I think about that. I think about those things. I think about the kind of belief, blind belief, because I'd only written like a few feeble stories, but he could see him and others, so many others. Mukone Mulite, he's actually the one that gave me the job. It was funny because so my mom knew Mukone Mulite, who was the managing editor at the Sowetan, and so she spoke to Mukone, and Mukone said, okay, you can come. So then my mom tells me, okay, you've got a job. You need to go to the Sowetan. And I get there and I realize I don't have a job.
She's like, you can come and have a conversation.
Yeah, so we had a conversation. And it was like, okay, there's a chair, sit there and write and see what happens. So for like a few weeks, I would just write, submit stories, expecting to be published. Nothing would happen. No one would tell me, give me any feedback. Just keep writing. Keep writing. I would keep writing. And then I found my way, You start making I realized, okay, in this news environment, I'm very slow as a writer. And in this news environment, I'm not going to thrive in the way that I think that I should. So then I started looking at other sections. I spoke to Tyrone August, who was the features editor. And he had part of his team, Sharon Chetty, who was a features writer at the Sowetan. So they took me under their wing partly and started helping me, develop my feature writing abilities. And then I saw when Sunday World launched as a broadsheet, and like all of these giants that were joining, Mondle Makanya, Andile Memela, Fred Khumalo. So I kind of looked there and thought, let me try and infiltrate that space. Wrote a few stories. I think the story that clinched my moving from the Sowetan to Sandile's team was a story I did on D'Angelo when he brought out Voodoo. I was a big D'Angelo fan. And I wrote this, I think I researched it for a month, writing this piece about Voodoo and what it means. And after all these years, and the progression from brown sugar to Voodoo and so on. And he thought, wow, okay. And he's like, Mommy, what are you doing over there at the Sowetan? Like, hey, I'm just writing. Like, no, come over here. So he came. So that was my first full-time job, because the Sowetan thing was, you get published, you get paid,
Oh, is that how it worked?
Yeah, that's how it worked. I only realized that later, because I thought, hey, I had a job. I'm gotta get a salary. It's like, no, dude. But I was able to convert that into, at some point, then I got published a lot more regularly, to the extent that I was able to buy a car even, I could save up. I was living at home, riding the train to the West Rand every day, back and forth.
But also finding your lane, like finding your rhythm. Because I think that's, especially in the world today where everything is so fast paced, like just you talking about, like, the minute you said, slow writer, therefore news, like I get it. But that's the stuff that people don't see, don't see.
Yeah.
Also, that's the stuff that, because I came to media because I write. I didn't study it. It wasn't, and then my father started a newspaper. So we had a weekly newspaper in one of our businesses, a weekly newspaper. So every week I worked, in addition to the IT company and the whatever, I worked on the newspaper. And then I had a column. I was given a column, and because I'd always written like for myself, and I've always enjoyed writing, and I grew up writing proposals and reports and typing my father's work. That's kind of how I got into, and then I always read. But getting into, for example, getting into a magazine and getting a glimpse of what it looks like behind the curtain, but then also realizing, I write a particular way, I have particular strengths.
Yeah.
And I guess because it wasn't finding my way, I was like, okay, I'm going to go and do this thing. I need to focus on what I know I'm capable of. I'm not going to go to that place. Like, I'm not going to go to a newspaper because I do not have any context or, while my family ran a newspaper, I don't know how a newspaper works.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes. I didn't study journalism. Like, even the rules in terms of, how you write a news article versus how you write a press release. That stuff I had to go and read and try and figure out on my own. Whereas the other stuff was, it's more natural for me. Like features writing, doing interviews, features writing, it feels more natural for me. So it's amazing that you were able to find yourself in a space relatively young with these people around you, but also for you to find your lane.
Yeah, it's not. I think also, finding your lane. So it's kind of like finding your voice as a writer. Where you were talking about this earlier on, where your voice is a function of a lot of things, but it is partly a function of what you read, who you read, to what extent you read that person more than other people, and for me, it meant reading as widely as possible. You were talking about your reading diet as a kid. In all of the magazines that I read growing up, the Vibes and there was a lot of football. There were a lot of football magazines in that space as well. Shoot, Gold, these UK magazines, and that kind of the UK is like the holy grail of football writing. I think still, and so there's a lot as a writer you can learn from football writers. Some of my favorite writers till this day are football. BBK, my colleague and great friend, is one of my favorites as well. And I marvel at his consistency. And
I've seen him
he's great. He's doing really well. And so it's borrowing from football writers, obviously music writers, arts, culture writers, but also from politics, political writers. And then somehow and columnists as well. I remember one of my favorite columnists at a time, it would be a surprise to a lot of people, was Daryl Bristol Bovey.
His were good.
Yeah, I loved his wit. I loved his...
I was weirdly a Barry Wronger.
Yes,
I love Barry Wronger.
Barry Wronger, Yeah.
I think it's Sunday Times Magazine.
Yes.
I and this is when I was still in Lesotho. Like before I even moved to Joburg. Like, I just used to read this guy's stuff because I love the way it's the stuff beyond the words.
Yeah.
It's the feeling beyond the words.
Sure. And, and nowadays, so many different, one of my favorite writers Well, two of my favorite writers actually is our new editor, Aspasia. She's just amazing as a writer. So much wit, so much. Also, a consequence of wide reading. She's got wide interests, and those all kind of flow into the writing. I would say my absolute favorite writer at the moment, and has been for a while, is Ndoguhle Nkosi. And I always say to her, gosh, I need to get my money right because I want to publish your book. And I understand she's working on a book now, so someone's beating me to it. But
lots of us have beaten you to it. How long have you been writing a book?
Hey, man,
we've been hearing about this book for like a decade.
20 years now. It's coming. Eventually.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a podcast in which I chat to Africans from a cross-section of society and sectors, including art, culture, design, business, and creativity, to name a few. We delve into their journeys, the decisions they have taken to get to where they are, how they do what they do, and everything in between. Essentially, we go wherever the spirit takes us. Now let's get back into the conversation. What prompted you to start Noted Man? And what was the intention behind it?
So Noted Man comes after our, I wouldn't say failed project of Blink magazine, but it's a project that was stopped in its tracks prematurely, which was really about looking at the African man through a different lens. And so Blink was really about celebration. It was about celebrating this guy who, in the new South Africa had emerged. So he wasn't necessarily born middle class, but he had become middle class. He had gone to school. He had, worked very hard and got to a certain level as an entrepreneur or in corporate or as a creative, and had, disposable income and had a wide array of interests, just like I did. Interested in fashion, grooming. He was interested in the world. He was interested in culture, cars, and so on. And there wasn't a title that represented that. And Blink really was that. It was literally the first title on the African continent that spoke to this guy. And the idea was to present a picture and a realistic, authentic picture of this person that existed. You were that guy. I was that guy. My group of friends were that guy. With all our flaws, we were that guy. And there was something positive and there was something to be celebrated. That was what Blink was about. And then after Blink collapsed, most unfortunately, I then went into GQ and tried to bring that guy along with me, because I had seen GQ, I'd been reading GQ from the UK, the US, for many years. And I'd seen the South African GQ, and I loved what Craig Tyson had done with the magazine and others before him. I remember Abdul Milazi, actually, who had been at the Sowetan before I joined. He was older than me, had been...
You're pulling old names. I'm like, oh, I've seen Abdul since poetry scene.
Yeah, so Abdul had been the first kind of black... he was the deputy editor at the time. I remember him, when the announcement was made, he came to see his old colleagues at the Sowetan, and when I first met him. And it was a big inspiration for me. And I kind of knew at the back of my mind that I would end up there at some point, which I did. And I was the first associate editor who wasn't white. And so I tried to bring that Blink guy into GQ and tried to infuse the pages. So I had a few pages that I was looking after as associate editor. Also wrote a column. So I tried to use the column to speak to a lot of these men that I had been speaking to in the Blink days, kind of bring that into GQ. I lost more fights than I won at GQ, unfortunately. Craig was very supportive, I think I know that he said this to me, that he felt that, in a few years he'd be moving on and I would be taking over position. But Blink happened, sorry, not Blink. Other life happened, and and I moved on. But I was, I was happy to see that Ngosiat Kumalo took over, and and did great things after that. And of course, GQ now is a completely, GQ became the thing that I wanted it to become then, I guess that the ideas were ahead of their time, they say. So Noted Man then, so after I left GQ, I spent 5 years at GQ while doing other entrepreneurial things that kind of grew me in many different ways. This is where I kind of found this entrepreneurial streak, or not really found it, because I think I had found it at university when we were doing all of these gigs and trying to be enterprising. I suppose I rediscovered it. But I still felt when there was a media space for men, for African men, that was missing. But it was now different from the ideas that I had at Blink. It was almost Blink 3.0, where we had now gone from celebrating this guy to taking a bit of a step back and say, actually, have we been doing too much celebrating and not enough introspection, right? Were we too euphoric about our successes and, the strides that we are making, that we neglected some of the most important things that constituted who we were as men, that gave us substance, where I'm not saying Blink didn't have substance. Of course, Blink was substance personified, but I think the difference between Blink and Noted Man was the idea of interrogation and putting the mirror to ourselves and saying, okay, where have we messed up? Have we cloaked ourselves in this good guy blanket for so long that we've neglected to dig deeper? And I think the answer was yes. And that was Noted Man. So we were saying, okay, you're great, you do yoga and you drive a fancy car and you do all of these things. But who are you really? Have you really interrogated that yourself? The fact that you don't beat your wife enough, is the fact that you are there for your kids enough, like, are we really praising a fish for swimming?
Yeah.
And that was Noted Man. And it was me asking these questions of myself and the audience, and we found a lot of resonance. I remember, you were the first person I had on the podcast that we launched there at Blink, at Noted Man. And these are the conversations that we were having. And I think these are conversations we've continued to have over the
absolutely.
years.
Because I was going to say, where do you think we are in terms of those conversations? And I say that knowing we've had conversations about it, but also looking at the trajectory. I remember, because I did Black, and I remember when my stint at Black ended, which was also a little messy, and looking at you, I think I was with you at an event or something, and I was like, the only person who understands how I feel right now is Siphiwe. And then kind of going from there to eventually Destiny Man. So it's like we've had this kind of, let's call it
almost like a parallel journey, right?
A parallel to a certain extent, but also kind of like I fed off what you did with Blink, influenced how I looked at Black.
Right, true.
And even when I went to Destiny Man, and you were GQ, because the Destiny Man, because, Blink and Black were, and we used to have these debates about, what it means when you say, oh, the audience is Black men. It's like, okay, how do you define that? How do we, what parameters do we put around it to be clear, especially in a country that's so diverse, right? And these are the conversations that I was having internally, but it felt like we're fed off each other with the different things that we've done, and then kind of reached the point. And I remember when you did Noted Man, kind of going, yeah, actually that makes sense, right? It's like the next step in the conversation. And there's, I don't know if you know George Macheke. So yes. George
Marvin.
Yeah. So, I mean, George, I had him on the podcast in the experimental phase, as you call it, early days. But how I met George was always on my case about how he needed publications that speak to Black men in this country in a, I hate to use the word authentic, but it feels like the most appropriate word, like in an authentic fashion, and speaking with, not to, and not for. And he used to hammer me on social media. I eventually called him into my office at Destiny Man and went, I get the cause, I get the emotional, the social, the cultural significance of what you're saying, but it's also a business, and all of these people have to be paid. And he had what, Studio 83. He's done about 2-3 different kind of online magazines, and now he's still working on Marvin. And I kind of, when you're talking about it, because, I remember when you went to Wanted, it was like, okay, well, Noted Man, because of life, has to be on the back burner. And now I was just kind of reflecting on it to go, okay, yes, between you and I, we have these little flags planted along the way, and now we're sitting here today, and it's like, okay, now what?
And it's funny because a lot of people thought we were rivals. I don't know if you know that, but
that I didn't even know.
Yeah. So people would be surprised, like if they would find that we were friends and we were in each other's spaces. Have you on the podcast? I'd be like, no, man, Coach, like we're in a WhatsApp group together. And I suppose because it's that mentality of there can't be too many of us in the same space, which is crazy. And with Noted Man, that was the other thing where we needed each other more than ever as men, just in general, because we were trying to figure out this thing. We're still trying to figure it out, and I think we need these conversations right now more than ever. I was talking to, just literally before I came in here, I sent a voice note, like a 7-minute voice note, to a friend of mine who was telling me about an ex schoolmate of his, white boy, so this is my Black friend talking about a white boy that he was roomies with at one of the top private schools in KZN. Rich white boy, and then his family lost everything, and he moved to the UK and is now down on his luck, like literally living on the streets and so on. And we were talking about the dynamics of masculinity. I mean, the term gets a little bit taxing, but for lack of a better one. So we're talking about masculinity and resilience and the kinds of things that we're faced with now, incel culture. I mean, I just finished watching Adolescence. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't watched it.
Yeah. And it kind of spotlights this manosphere and incel culture and how, and I think about the global north and this kind of backlash against what they've made a dirty term, against woke culture, if you will, and where now, being a rabid racist is being repackaged into this thing that's like anti-woke, and
it's
therefore
like the alpha male,
cool.
but a caricature of that, of the alpha male.
And even this idea of what an alpha male is. So I think we went from kind of misogyny, and it hasn't gone away, and the patriarchy hasn't gone away, but they're like different shifts that happen. So we go from kind of FHM culture, if you will, right, to no, we need to be a different kind of man. We need to be more sensitive. We need to tap into our feminine side, and and then there's this idea that this is in it so that kind of softening, if you will, has now emasculated us, and therefore we need to make this radical shift the other way. Where for me, the understanding was always, it was always not. It's not replacing one thing with another. it's broadening your horizons as a man. So one of the taglines for Noted Man was towards an expanded masculinity, right? It's a masculinity that you're still a protector, you're still a provider, but you have all of these other things as part of your character.
Yeah.
It's not either or, right? So, you are confident enough on one day to wear a pink shirt or the other day I was wearing a full pink suit, but largely I'm a monochrome guy, but it's variety. It's not like, okay, I will no longer wear pink. I'll just wear, so I think for me there's a lot, but I think for me where things have gone wrong is there may have been an overcorrection with many people, or maybe a misunderstanding as well of what this modern man is supposed to look like, what he's supposed to be feeling, how he's supposed to be presenting himself. And I'm very sensitive to the fact that, especially for younger men, or even men of my generation, our generation and older, and I think it's maybe in that kind of millennial, maybe into a little bit of Gen Z, where there's a lot more nuance and there's a lot more understanding of nuance. But, coming back to this adolescence where you have this 13-year-old boy, and the story is kind of inspired by partly this knife culture in the UK. And I think there were 2 girls who were killed through knife crime by young boys. And it kind of inspired the story. But the interesting, when I try and apply to South Africa, I can think of a few things where, when you look at the data, there are a few things that are happening. Girls and women are overtaking men and boys in representation in different places. So more girls and young women are enrolling it and getting degrees at university and getting the jobs in the corporate environment. Still not getting the top jobs as much because the patriarchy is still strong, right? But there's a huge proportion of women who are succeeding in those spaces. And the knee-jerk reaction from men and boys is kind of we are being replaced. It's kind of the same thing as this xenophobic tenure where we're being replaced by these aliens from outer space or whatever, where it's kind of your fellow man and your fellow sister. And then, and I think those young men also, their fathers are going through the same thing. So they don't have the language, they don't have the wherewithal to kind of help them through, we're all struggling through the same thing of trying to figure out where we are, what we're supposed to be doing. Are we supposed to be are we supposed to be nurturers, or are we supposed to be protectors? And I say we're supposed to be all of those things, because the irony is that women have been expected to be all of those things. Right? Yeah. And not just in the modern era. I mean, you think back to women who had their husbands migrating to find jobs, and then their traditional role was to take care of the home, take care of the kids. But then there's a gap in income, household income, because sometimes this guy goes off to the mines and whatever he's sending back is not enough. And maybe some of it stays there because he's now got another wife and another family, right? So there's this gap. And women were just kind of expected to miraculously fill that gap. And they did, starting little spaza shops, illicit trade in alcohol, selling excess, surplus produce, being entrepreneurial. So without it being labeled anything, women were doing everything, right? And these are the things that we are now expected to do as well, to be the provider, to be the protector, but also to be a nurturer, to sit down and do homework, to have conversations about the birds and the bees, to do all of those things. So for me, then it's not really about either or. Yeah. Right. It's really about being an expanded man, if you.
Yeah, and I also find that it's being open with the fact that we're all trying to figure it out. I had a therapist once tell me that it's important with my kids, especially my son, to share some of my struggles and challenges from when I was growing up, and even just stuff I'm trying to figure out. Like, being able to say, you're going through X, Y, Z. Like, I mean, now my son just goes, hey, this guy, back in my day, he's always talk about back in my day. But that comes from being told, sometimes you need to actually, your children, especially your sons, as a man, need to know that what they see, which feels complete and whole, and a solid, immovable object, like that's the way you are. This is how you look at the world, etc. It's like, no, I've had to go through stuff to get to here, and I'm still trying to figure stuff out. So that, I mean, I love that idea of expanded, because, yeah, it's not a replacement. Like you're not wiping out one version of yourself, and it's a remix. It's not it's not a replacement of a model. It's like a remix. It's just dimensions being added to it.
Sure. And it's not to say we've got it all figured out. In our WhatsApp group, where the debates that we have, where I think the more recent one was that question about, did we overcorrect? We were kind of going back and forth. It isn't. We've just forgotten that it's not one thing or the other.
Yeah,
it's all of it. And I think if we look at it like that, I mean, it's not easy. Still have, men and boys are still the more likely around the world, still the more likely to commit suicide. We still, so all of those things need to be dealt with in a way that, I mean, it's so easy. I mean, you've just talked about seeing a therapist, and you forget that in 5-10 years ago, like, men seeing therapists was not a thing, or at least not a thing that we talked about.
Yeah.
And it was seeing a therapist only when there's a problem, And now it's kind of
forced,
like
when your partner forces
yes,
you to go.
And I mean, I remember that there was a time when I needed to see a therapist many years ago in a couple situation. Went to one session, I was like, actually, I'm not doing this, And this was at a time when a large part of me was cloaked in this good guy blankets that I was talking about. And thinking back now, I kind of wonder or rather I think about the work that has had to be done to get to a place now where, I'll be having a casual conversation with my most masculine of friends, and he'll be like, yeah, my therapist was saying the other day that I should do X, Y, and Z.
It's become the new thing.
Yeah.
My therapist said I should.
Yeah. Which is great. And I think it's about, I think it's about listening to ourselves as well, right? Going back to what you were asking about Noted Man, and I was talking about the difference between Blink and Noted Man. I think the other thing that was different was more listening than pontificating, and listening to more women than your peers, than men. So reading people like Linda Gutle for me, has been illuminating over the years. Reading people like Dr. Atambile Masola, listening to so many women, listening to my wife in a different way, and allowing her to challenge me to be a better person. In that 7-minute monologue that I sent to my friend, I was saying to him that, there's a point in our relationship where my wife was demanding more of me, where I thought, I'm giving everything, and she was like, no, this is what I need from you. All of these other things are great, but this particular thing is what I need most from you. I didn't get it for a very long time, and it kind of clicked into place. And I didn't decide that it clicked into place. She told me eventually that, you know, that guy I thought you could be, this is the guy I'm seeing now because you worked on this particular. And you know what's great about that is when you are able to humble yourself and do those things and do that work, you can then demand more of her, right? In other ways that you felt that, you know, she could improve, and she would be more forthcoming in addressing those things because you've put in the work as well. So it's, you know, a win-win.
Yeah, and I find you use the phrase, which is the name of our WhatsApp group, the importance of doing the work. And for me, it was actually kind of in hearing that phrase, because you kind of hear it and it rolls on the tongue and it sounds really cool. But I had a moment where I plugged into what it actually means. And one of my favorite words has become deliberate, right? It's yes, we're living this life, and specifically as men, we need to do the work, but we need to be deliberate about doing the work. So, like, recognize that, you know, there's work to be done. And I think, you know, like, my whole thing is, because I think both of us are more behind the scenes people naturally. Anything that looks performative in any particular way, I tend to recoil against it. And it's because at some stage I plugged into, it's about doing the work. It's about doing the work. Doesn't matter who sees it.
Yeah.
As long as you know you're doing the work, you're being deliberate about it. So that's why I always struggle whenever somebody talks about, oh, somebody's doing X, Y, Z. And it's like, they're telling people about it. It doesn't feel like they're doing the work.
Yeah. No, it's true, you know. Although I've also come to realize that, you know, some of it, I mean, this is why, I think this is partly why I left Twitter, because I used to do a lot of shouting on Twitter at some point, and then I left. Maybe it's probably coming on 10 years now. And a lot of the, you know, and, you know, I'll hardly say anything about this stuff on Instagram anymore, and which is pretty much, apart from LinkedIn's, the only platform I'm on now. And yeah, the behind the scenes thing for me, it's really about trying to influence my immediate environment as opposed to trying to megaphone everything.
Yeah.
Right. There probably will be a time again when I need to megaphone, and it kind of feels like that time is coming, because I mean, the irony is that we are two bros sitting in front of mics, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of women say part of the problem that we face is that there are too many mics and too many bros pontificating about nonsense. And so I'm very mindful of that stuff. But, you know, it also feels like there's so much toxicity that is coming from these mics and these bros that, you know, I think we need to, I don't know, bro, we need to maybe step up again in more vocal, more visible ways, in addition to the stuff we're doing behind the scenes. I just don't know how to do that yet, because there's a time when, there've been many moments where I've been asked to debate people on television or on radio, and I can't do it, because it you know, I would, the exasperation, you know, would really affect my performance, which is why I'm more comfortable kind of thinking about these things and listening and reading and, you know, DMing smart women that I know, and asking questions, and so that, and it's almost felt like I've been training, right, over the past few years, training, getting fitter, and you know, training the brain, consuming a lot more information to be able to be a better advocate or a better spokesperson for this idea of this expanded masculinity. It's neither kind of brutal alpha or whatever it is that these brutal alphas will call the opposite of that. whether it's emasculated or feminine or whatever the case, nonsense that they may use. So I think it's time to get into the ring. I suspect.
So how I reconcile, for example, this in my head, in comparison to what you do, like the bro boys and the bro pods and all of these things. This is an opportunity for me to talk to people and find out about their lives and their thoughts and their journeys. I share myself. It's not the typical here are my interview questions. I ask you a question, you answer. But I'm not the center of it. And what I find with all of these, and I struggle to even engage with them, is people expressing their opinions. So you have two guys sitting on microphones and spend an hour telling the world what they think about things that are happening in the world and what it means.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, I've never, and I guess it's an extension of what social media became, because social media in the beginning, democratized voice, and it gave all of us a platform to express ourselves. But we've then now come to a stage where in the world, you don't have to be an expert in anything. You don't have to have engaged with anything in any type of meaningful way for you to have a platform to express an opinion on that thing. Yeah. And my father always used to say to me, look, if what you say is not going to add value, then rather not say it. And that's kind of been that's kind of been one of my, let's say, measuring sticks, where I have opinions on a lot of stuff, but you'll know it when the mics are not off. Like, I'll tell you as I think X, Y, Z. But the minute the mics are on, it's like, no. Do I think it adds value? I can't really back it up. I feel that way, or I think that way, but I can't really, I have no empirical evidence. I have no real anecdotes to bring to the table. So rather, let me just keep it to myself.
Yeah, you would, sometimes you would think when you listen to these guys, you would think that they have a PhD in women's studies, because they're always telling the world what they think women should do.
Yeah,
because they've got so much experience in being women, right?
Yeah.
So and they know zero. They know nothing about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just bravado and super confidence, and yeah, I think it got to a point, or it's got to a point for me that I think maybe those are the things, or those are the reasons why I'm feeling like I need to kind of come back up to the surface again on many of these things, because I think it's important to have, when I think about my sons, I've got two sons. One is turning 22 next week, and that one is 13, and they're quite similar, but also different in many ways. 13-year-old is quietly confident, the most quietly confident boy you'd ever meet. Because of the lives that we've led and kind of moving around, he's attended a lot of schools. He's just starting high school now. I think it's the 6th or 7th school that he's attended. But he's been able to remain himself, but fit into so many environments. Just easily can make friends easily. He's not the loudest boy in the room, but he thinks it's very cool. But he's smooth with it, and then his older brother, a lot more quiet. Reminds me of my younger self, and very thoughtful, musical, like his great grandfather. But inside him, there's this raging socialist, right? It's like hardcore, it's almost, yeah. like is yeah, is a Marxist pretty much. And so when I find I find when I talk to them or I deal with them, I suppose their political views or their outlook shaped by their parents. Um, the 13-year-old's mother is like a struggle child, grew up in a very political family, very fiery, radical, and a beauty editor. She still works in the beauty industry. But she was always the beauty editor that was asking all of the political questions that the brands were like very nervous, always nervous when they saw her hand up. And I must say that she's about to get even more radical now. Watch the space. And then the older one, his mother is also, mother's a journalist and very tough as a journalist. I mean, she's moved into right now, but always very tough as a tough interviewer. So they're shaped by all of those things, and in my dealing with them, then I have to kind of I have to keep all of those things in mind, and try not to impose my opinions on them, and they challenge a lot of the things that I'll say to them, and I'll play devil's advocate a lot because I want to get stuff out of them as well. And it's also interesting for me to hear what and I like the gap in their age groups, because then it gives me access to what are young men thinking and what are teenagers thinking, because it's those are kind of crucial ages right now with what we're dealing with in this manosphere stuff. And there was a time when the 13-year-old was asking a lot of questions that were clearly influenced by kind of the Andrew Tates of this world. And in the beginning, I would freak out, and I would think, no, actually, he's figuring these things out, because he's hearing these things at school, and then maybe watches a YouTube video here and there, and then things confuse him because he's grown up in this feminist household, and then there are these things the world throws at him that he now needs to be equipped to defend, because maybe he's in a class or a peer group where all of the boys' fathers are these alpha male types, right? And his father is slightly different to that. So how does he defend his point of view, or the point of view that he's forming because of his parents' influence? And so coming back to that thing I was saying about trying to influence my own environment, it's then those opportunities where if I can help him figure these things out, and he can then stand with his peers and be able to defend those opinions. He changes one boy, changes the other, maybe one or two, and then there's a ripple effect. So that's a very interesting. I don't know where I started with this, but that's where I went with it. And so it's interesting, it's as I grow older, and it's also about learning a lot more, as I was saying, to someone asked me to speak to a group of young people some years ago, and mostly young boys, motivational speech or whatever, and one of the things I was saying to them, and they were like 99% black and kind of in the all encompassing sense, Indian boys, colored, black, African, one or two white. I was like, so those of you who are black in this room, and they were in a transitional phase, kind of going into the workplace. Some of them maybe. So if you've ever suspected that the world is against you, things are rigged in other people's favor, they're all out to get you, you're right. Right? It's all true. Like I'm not here to tell you that all you need is hard work and you'll succeed. No. you need a lot more than that. You know, you want to go into the media, you're going to need someone like me who's worked in the media to write you a letter of recommendation. You're going to need your cousin or your uncle who works at ESCOM to give you that shot, because all of the others that don't look like you have that. And this is how they have succeeded, from generation to generation. If it's not the physical handing over of cash to be able to buy your first car or to put a deposit on your first apartment, it's been dad calling his friend at such and such a bank to give you an internship, and you're gonna need that. So because the world isn't set up for you to succeed, it's in fact deliberately set up for you not to succeed, for you to fail, right? So that it perpetuates this system, and the immediate reaction was kind of I was like, yeah, really, like, look at the one next to you, look at this one next to you. Between the three of you, one or maybe two of you is not quite going to make it in the way that you think you are, right? And so you need to figure that out. You need to understand that as your reality, and then to ask yourself, okay, so knowing all of that, what do I do? Because for too many years, you've had the hardest working people in the country, right? Break their backs for 50 years, thinking that, no, as long as I just keep working hard, I'm going to make it. And that person dies thinking that, right? It takes a lot more than that. I was watching a little clip of, who was it, Anthony Mackie, who was saying the same thing about, these things are given to people. You can work as hard as you want, but if there's no one who kind of gives you that little shot in the arm to kind of, if there's no Don Matera to give you a little, there's no agri-cluster to say, what are you doing? So he walks in, the one time he walks into the newsroom, it's a public holiday. It was me and Matumo Letswalo. So we were in the same, Matumo went on to the political reporter and investigative journalist, Mail and Guardian. And we're the only two people in the newsroom, plus kind of a news editor who's waiting for something to happen on a public holiday. What are you doing here? You should be out in the Shabin drinking. That's where you get your stories, And then he promptly took us in his car and he's like, come, let's go. And we went off to the East Rand and, we had and then suddenly we had stories for the next day. So if it's not for things like that, it's not for, if it isn't for people like that to kind of just give you, or your mother or my mom calling her friend to say, hey man, give my boy a chance, So I think the message then to them was kind of, if you have these opportunities, if you, if you've got access to a Kojo, do what's his name, George did with you, and maybe it will get you somewhere. But if you're gonna just kind of chill there and think, you know what, let me just work hard. Yeah, hard work is great, and I'm not putting that down at all, but you need more.
Absolutely, and it's understanding that it's like the expanded man. There's different ways. So the world, it may feel like it's against you, but sometimes it's that person down the road who you see every day, but you have a particular perception of them. Not knowing that, what some friends were talking about, that whole 6 degrees of separation thing. And it's like, sometimes we don't realize how certain people or certain spaces are a lot more accessible than we realize they are, because we look at it one particular way. And therefore it feels like there's this big wall in front of us. But there's different ways. So my fascination right now is raising children who have access and their relationship with access. Because I am finding that the children that we're raising with access, for them it's not a big deal. So I still think about it from the position of scarcity, and like, you must come with me to do X, Y, Z. because other people would love to do that. And my children are just like, dude, I'm busy today. You know,
No,
it's like I'm busy today. Like, oh, I'm chilling, or like I'm on holiday. Can I please relax? And I'm like, and I said this to my son the other day. I'm like, dude, other people would want the opportunity to come and sit in a studio and see how things work. And you are just like, yeah, no, I'm on holiday.
yeah, I mean, no. To just the 32-year-old Skotole, and he studying music, and one of his things is that he wants to kind of learn the 360 degree, more interested in production and sound engineering, but wants to learn the business and
My
so
son's also to go.
So, I mean, I don't know how long it took to get him to do his CV. For example. This is where the piece where the hard work comes into play. It's like you have to do that. You know, you have to write the CV. And now I'm trying to get him an internship at a record company. Tapped into my network, spoke to someone who's an exec there. He's like, hey, cool, I've got his CV, but he needs to write a covering letter. Now, again, while I was waiting to go, I was like, just a little nudge to write that covering letter. The CV is not enough. Okay, cool. And I'm hoping I don't have to wait for too long to be able. So it's kind of that understanding of, yeah, you know, you do, I suppose as an added piece, you do, yes, the hard work gets you somewhere, but you need that push, you need that help. But then you also, you know, you need to, you need to put in, some, you know, that little extra so that you get it over. One question for you. I was always fascinated by your stoicism, like your study of stoicism and your belief in stoicism. And I'm wondering how that has evolved in the last, say, in the 5 years since COVID, actually, because I think COVID was a good test for those beliefs and those life choices.
I found that. So what I read under and what I engage with when I read in Stoicism, I'm actually reading the lives of the Stoics, kind of little biographies. There were certain things my father raised me with, like the line, "It's not what happens to you, it's about what you do when it happens to you." And when I went to university, my father gave me a book called Choices. His whole thing was, it's all about the choice. Life is about the choices that you make. Not making a choice is a choice in itself. I am finding that the connection between this is what I was raised with and this is what it falls under is a lot clearer to me. But it's an ebb and flow thing. Like I plugged into the idea that, you know, focus on what you can control. And what you can control is, you know, kind of yourself, how you feel about things, how you approach things, how you react to things. That said, in the last year, I have found myself, let's call it lapsing. Where I'm reacting, where I'm starting to see my standard or my knee-jerk reactions to certain things and certain experiences. Like if you talk a particular way and every time you say that, it irritates, I get irritated. I'm starting to see that a lot more and trying to work at not reacting that way. And it's especially with the people closest to me, like my family, or, you know, people that I work with, where I get this kind of email and automatically I'm irritated. And so I'm finding I'm trying to be a bit more deliberate about recognizing that it's a automatic reaction which shouldn't be, and how do I work my way out. With COVID, it helped me kind of get through the stress of not working, having to move to a smaller house, not paying school fees, not having money. but I already was going through that experience before COVID. So that's, I'd say that's kind of what Stoicism has given me. But also I tend to, I'll read on stuff and I'll pick one or two things. So I guess like I never grew up religious, and I find value in little bits and pieces of many things. So I can't plug into, like, I can't wake up tomorrow and go, I'm a Stoic and I'm embracing the whole thing. It's just like, I found these two little pieces, they work for me, I'm gonna go with them. And if I add something, then that's cool. So that's kind of, yeah. But it's more the internal. So it's the stuff that people don't see. So I tend to be, I'm viewed as quite calm and quite even keel. As a child, I was extremely moody, and I'd literally go from up here to down here to back up in 30 minutes. So there's a lot of stuff happening inside. And that's I guess that's where that's where my work is, in terms of recognizing that, okay, that is actually not productive and that's not conducive to how we're navigating the world.
Find your sweet spot.
Thanks, but thank you very much, my man.
Thank you, man. I enjoyed this. You almost had me tearing up there once or twice.
I saw you were having a moment. I was like, let me let you navigate it. But cool, thanks. Thank you for listening to this conversation. Please leave a review and subscribe. Check out the show notes for links to the guest, the podcast, and myself. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.